One person keeps returning to your mind again and again, not because you miss them, not because you love them, and not because they are meant to come back, but because your mind is trying to tell you something deeper that you've been ignoring. And psychology says when a single person repeats in your thoughts without effort, it is never random. It is a hidden emotional signal. And today you will understand the real psychological reason behind it. Sign 1. Your mind is trying to complete an unfinished emotional conversation. Psychology says the brain hates incomplete emotional experiences. And when something emotional was left unsaid, unfelt, or unresolved with someone, the mind keeps replaying that person as if trying to finish a conversation that never ended. Maybe you never said what you truly felt. Maybe they never explained their actions. Maybe closure never happened. And even if years have passed, the emotional part of the brain does not understand time the way logic does. So it keeps bringing that person back, not because you want them now, but because your mind still wants an ending it never received. Sign 2. They represent a version of you that you lost. Sometimes the person returning to your mind is not important for who they are, but for who you were when they were in your life. Psychology explains that the brain associates people with emotional identity states, and when life becomes stressful, lonely, confusing, or emotionally dry, the mind searches its memory for a time when you felt more alive, more seen, more emotional, or more yourself. And that person becomes a symbol of that lost version of you. So you think about them not because you want them back, but because your soul misses who you were back then. Sign 3. Your brain is processing emotional safety, not attraction. Repeated thoughts about someone are often mistaken for attraction, but psychology shows that emotional safety leaves a deeper mental imprint than physical desire. If that person once made you feel understood, calm, emotionally safe, or accepted without effort, your nervous system remembers them as a safe emotional anchor. And during moments of stress, loneliness, or emotional overload, your brain naturally returns to the memory of safety. Even if logically you know that relationship or connection is no longer possible or even healthy. Sign 4. You were emotionally vulnerable when they entered your life. Psychology states that people who enter our lives during emotionally vulnerable phases leave stronger mental imprints. If you met them during a time of pain, confusion, heartbreak, identity loss, or emotional need, your brain linked them to survival-level emotions. And because emotional vulnerability heightens memory formation, that person becomes deeply wired into your subconscious. So your mind brings them back not because you want them now, but because they were present during a time when your emotions were raw and unprotected. Sign 5. Your subconscious is searching for emotional validation. Sometimes one person keeps returning to your mind because they once made you feel chosen, important, or valued in a way others didn't. Psychology explains that validation creates dopamine-based memory loops. And when current life lacks emotional recognition, appreciation, or intimacy, the mind automatically goes back to the last source that provided it, even if that source is no longer present, and even if thinking about them now brings confusion or sadness instead of comfort. Sign 6. You associate them with emotional meaning, not reality. The brain does not remember people as they truly were. It remembers them as emotional meanings. Psychology calls this emotional tagging, where your mind attaches feelings, hopes, expectations, and imagined futures to a person, and over time, the real person fades while the emotional symbol remains. So you're not thinking about who they actually are today. You're thinking about what they once represented, what you hoped they would become, or what you believed the connection meant for your life. Sign 7. There was emotional intensity without emotional resolution. High emotional intensity without closure is one of the strongest triggers for recurring thoughts. Psychology shows that relationships or connections that ended suddenly, ambiguously, or without clear explanation stay active in the mind far longer than peaceful endings because the brain keeps replaying scenarios, trying to make sense of what happened. And this is why even short connections can haunt the mind longer than long relationships if emotional intensity was high, but emotional understanding was low. Sign 8. Your brain is replaying patterns, not people. Psychology reveals that the mind often repeats familiar emotional patterns, not because they are healthy, but because they are known. If that person fits a familiar emotional pattern from your past, such as inconsistency, emotional distance, emotional unpredictability, or deep emotional connection mixed with pain, your mind keeps revisiting them because the brain prefers familiar emotional environments over unknown ones, even if familiarity includes pain, confusion, or longing. Sign 9. You never got to be your true self with them. When you had to suppress feelings, hide parts of yourself, or stay silent to maintain the connection, psychology says those suppressed parts remain psychologically active, and the person becomes a mental trigger for everything you couldn't express. So your mind keeps returning to them not because you want them back, but because parts of you were never fully seen, heard, or allowed to exist in that dynamic, and the brain keeps revisiting the memory hoping for a different outcome. Sign 10. They mirror something you still need to heal. Sometimes a person stays in your thoughts because they reflect a wound you haven't healed yet. Psychology explains that the mind revisits emotional mirrors until the underlying issue is resolved. Whether that wound is abandonment, rejection, unworthiness, emotional neglect, or fear of loss, that person becomes a symbol of that wound. And until healing happens, the mind keeps bringing them back as a reminder, not as a desire. Sign 11. Your mind is letting go slowly, not holding on. The most misunderstood psychology truth is that recurring thoughts do not always mean attachment. Sometimes they mean release in progress. The brain does not let go suddenly. It detaches in layers, and each time that person returns to your mind, it may actually be your psyche processing, integrating, and slowly loosening the emotional bond. And this is why over time, the thoughts become less intense, less emotional, and more neutral until one day you realize they no longer carry power over your inner world. When one person keeps returning to your mind, psychology says it is not a sign of weakness, obsession, or inability to move on. It is a sign that your mind is doing emotional work in the background, trying to understand, heal, process, and integrate an experience that once mattered deeply to your emotional system. And the goal is not to force yourself to stop thinking about them, but to understand why your mind brings them back. Because awareness is what transforms emotional repetition into emotional freedom. And the moment you stop asking, why do I still think about them? And start asking, what part of me is still speaking through this memory, is the moment healing truly begins. Because sometimes the person is not the message, the emotion is. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to like, comment, and share and subscribe.